Thank you very much. I know it's hard to tear yourself away after years of not meeting in person, but if we could get the doors closed, I think we'll be able to start our next panel. Thank you very much, and thank you to those of you joining online, and we appreciate your patience as everyone comes back from the coffee. Our next panel session is going to be on enabling data sharing for CCAM and beyond. We heard in the last session a lot about what we need to do, but we're going to delve into it in more detail now. We've mentioned, of course, the future is already here in some cases. We see vehicles increasingly equipped with ADAs, radars, cameras, and so on. And we're also seeing cooperative ITS, intelligent transport systems, to offer drivers more support and increase safety, and hopefully reduce the terrible traffic jam that Rosalind was telling us about, and make driving smarter and reduce congestion as well. So there are lots of good reasons for our vehicles and the roads and the infrastructure to talk to each other. In many parts of the world, we hear data is the new oil. We're not going to say that today because we're going to take that as read for this panel session. We're going to try and talk about how to improve cooperation between the public and the private sectors for building digital road infrastructure. And we also want to have a look at what's already been done to develop these joint activities and how data sharing can be enhanced for future CCAM services. And on the panel, of course, we have both sides. We have got those representing the vehicle and the infrastructure, as well as, of course, the European Commission. So I'd like to invite my panellists to join me here, please, on stage. Geert van der Linden is the Policy Officer of the European Commission within DG Move in the Unit on Sustainable and Intelligent Transport in the European Commission. Grab a seat. Thank you. Sabine Kuschelm is the CCAM Association Chair at the Austrian Federal Ministry for Climate Action. Thank you very much. Jacqueline Erhardt is Chair of the Permanent Committee for Intelligent Transport Systems and Connected and Autonomous Vehicles. Jacqueline, thank you very much. Joost van Tom is CEO of Vertico. We know and love you very well. Thank you very much, Joost. Pierre Millet is a Smart Mobility Director at ACAA. And Ryota Shirato is Vice President of ITS Japan. Thank you all so much for being here. Now, we have all talked about in the last panel about the relevance of digital road infrastructure. So I'm going to assume we're all on the same page on that. And just ask a sort of general opening question about whether we're doing enough to build the sort of infrastructure we need. What is already happening today, and what can we do better? If you could give me your thoughts on that as an opening response.
Well, I think we can definitely do more. We're trying to do more. We're trying to convince everybody to do more. Because digitalization, if I may talk a little bit about the things that we were working on recently, is we revised the ITS directive, which is all about interoperability and data sharing. And one of the key conclusions we came up with is that even though we know how to do this, we're not doing it sufficiently. And so now we're trying to make progress on that. And it's really baby steps if I compare it to lofty goals such as having very high levels of automation on the road. We're talking basic, crucial data to make that available. And I think we can do more on that. I think it is very important what we discuss here today on how we can do this together, because it is not one party that can magically create all the data and then share it. So we all need to do this together. And I think there's lots of opportunities to share both between the vehicle side and the infrastructure side. So we're trying to do our part of the work on creating a framework that makes this possible. And then very much looking forward to the other panelists to see how we can work together to do it faster.
Sabine, are we doing enough together?
Yeah, thank you. Does it work?
It should. Give it a second.
Hello?
Yep.
Okay. So now it works. Yeah, thank you very much for these very interesting questions. And actually, this year I have the big honor to be the president of CEDA, which is only half an honor because I didn't really earn it. It rotates the presidency, and so it comes up to every member of CEDA now and then. So, but nevertheless, I feel quite honored, and we have a lot to do this year. And of course, we are not doing enough. The landscape of transport changes very, very quickly, and likewise, NRAs have to adapt to that quick change also very quickly. Some stakeholders really focus on developing new technologies, but in the end, it is the NRA and it is under the NRA's responsibility where these new technologies are deployed on actual roads. I think therefore we have to strengthen the cooperation and also the knowledge transfer between the different stakeholders. It is for me the only way to grant and improve the management of roads and the traffic control. Also, I think that transport and traffic does not stop at borders. And it also does not stop at one singular perspective of one transport mode. So we should really strengthen cooperation with NRAs from neighboring countries and also strengthen cooperation with different transport modes. I think this is very, very crucial for the future. One of the main key assets of an NRA is that they are really able to offer large-scale testing. And they can also provide the infrastructure for creating a digital twin, one of the main drivers for higher levels of automation. So cooperating stakeholders could provide the NRAs with the data for the infrastructure, and I think this is where data comes into focus, yeah, because data is crucial. Without data, the whole automation scenario would be nothing. So we can only reach all the goals that we set, yeah, environmental goals, societal goals, when the vehicles communicate with the infrastructure. The vehicles communicate with each other and with the infrastructure. If this is just the autonomous vehicle driving solarly, it would be like a moon vehicle, but no benefit would be gained from that. Yeah, so I think communication is crucial, data sharing is crucial, and we really have to strengthen cooperation between all stakeholders.
Well, thank you. Tell me then, Jacqueline, what are we already doing well in that regard?
Thanks first for inviting us. I'm representing today ASICAP. Maybe for those who do not know our organization, we are the European Association of Operators of Tolled Motorways, and we operate, in fact, 82,000 kilometers of tolled motorways, tunnels, bridges across 19 member states. With 128 companies. So we have some kind of relation to the CCAM roadmap in Europe. And we want to appreciate and thanks to the Commission who supported us for the last decades. Because without the CEF funding, without the Horizon funding, the digital infrastructure would not be in that kind of already provision which we have for starting and a little bit leveraging the opportunities of CCAM, because otherwise we may have not invested so early in a digital infrastructure. What works well? First of all, we are already providing services for road safety. I mean, we have connected roads on some parts. We have started operational functionalities for the last years, and we have the first trials and even deployments, large-scale deployments in place in Europe. So what is really working good is that we have a European approach which we want to build on and continue working on that. I heard in the introduction of today's meeting that CCAM is a team sport. It's about the automotive industry, and road infrastructure is also part of it. Road infrastructure is there and it lasts for a very long time. And if you think about how, you also heard about the trade-off of financing. If we think about where data comes from, I think it should be shared in a way of infrastructure and also the vehicles and also the traffic management. So I think what works good, we have identified that silo approaches are no longer the answer on how to solve the issue of leveraging the CCAM benefits, and that with the collected and valuable data of infrastructure, we have the opportunity to see even more when we are looking into a bilateral and equal shared ecosystem.
Thank you. Joost, give us the Ertico perspective on what's working and what could work better.
Well, first, good morning. Allow me to thank the European Commission for this edition of the, I would say, EUCAD. I was there in number 1. We are number 5, I think, now, so congratulations. Secondly, also for the FAME project, who is co-organizing this with the Commission, and thanks for being part also with the team there. Since we are a European partnership, a European public-private partnership, over 120 members, we play music, which means we have different instruments. We have the roads, we have the traffic and transport industry, we have the users, you see all this. And actually what we try to do with these 8 sectors, with these 8 verticals, to make the de-siloification right. Technically, meaning we try to talk to each other, and that's one, but secondly, we try to deliver. That's what you see on the screen. These are a number of examples of data sharing spaces, I would say. And it goes across the board, across member states, obviously, EU27 and beyond. The latest one is automated valet parking. It's much more than linking vehicles with the parking infrastructure, with our friends of the European Parking Association, so the bricks and mortar and the real estate. It's about connectivity, short and long range. It's about also giving signals, what kind of capturing of the signals you have from a vehicle from the outside. So for us, that's some of the examples on platforms that we try to enable to put people together. So the good news is that since 5 years on this CCAM story, and impetus from the Commission, I think it would start with the Amsterdam Declaration, if I remember well, is that we bring these ecosystems together. We try to understand each other's language, each other's taxonomies. And we build together 1 + 1 is 3 and not 2. These are data spaces where we actually do 1 + 1 is 3. Yeah? And it's about safety-related cases, but also about traffic management cases. Yeah? About our work with NAPCOR as well on standardizing data sets. So there's a lot to be done, but there still has a lot has been done. So very proud to be at the helm of Ertico with all of you, and looking forward to the next session, for the next panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Joost. I like de-siloification. That's a high Scrabble score, that word. Let me turn, Pierre, to you. Give us your perspective. What has chimed with you from what you've already heard, or where do you see differences in approach?
I like, especially what was said earlier, that CCAM is a team sport, because it does reflect the kind of landscape that we are looking at to make it happen. But first, to take stock a bit of what works today and what we have. There are actually good things that have been done, and speaking for the motor vehicle industry, we have 5.9 gigahertz communication already. I don't want to get too technical this morning, but we have means for vehicles to communicate. They are being deployed. We have standards that have been developed. And already we have forms of ITS that are quite widespread in Europe. Let's not forget, and I think Joost will be familiar with this, the initiative, the Data for Road Safety initiative that led to safety-related traffic information, SRTI, being shared across vehicles, across the entire continent. Now, of course, this is not CITS as we understand it as a safety system. We're talking here more about an early warning system, but there is something there. The question is, though, why don't we see CITS today more? Why is it not more widespread? Well, there's a missing link, ultimately, and the missing link in Europe is the infrastructure. We have given a lot of attention to vehicles, what vehicles should do and what they can do, and rightly so, but at the same time, this aspect of the discussion, I believe, has somewhat obscured the need for other stakeholders also to share data, because in the end, from the point of view of vehicle manufacturers, if you're going to move beyond ADAS, and so far, this is partly why in Europe vehicle safety has lean heavily towards the development of single vehicle ADAS solutions. But if we want to go beyond that, the true incentive for the more widespread use of ITS really lies in infrastructure. And I hear something that you might not necessarily expect from the industry, but I would go as far as saying that legislation may actually be beneficial in this regard. Because what we'd be looking at with the legal framework would be a clear definition of the manufacturer's responsibilities. Also, a better guideline, a better framework on how to operate the different technologies together. And most of all, pan-European conditions to make CITS work with the infrastructure and with the vehicles together.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Ryota, tell us the Japanese perspective and what we can learn from what's happening.
Okay, thank you very much. So in Japan, we had a very big project named SIP ADAS. So on that project, we had a big test in Tokyo. So they used some CCAM systems that is providing the traffic light information and merging information from the infrastructure. And the cars get such kind of information to go through the intersections, like something like that. So at that time, we had some big project and the big testing for such kind of CCAM and infrastructure related systems. But that project was ended in last March 2023, so that we had to have another project to proceed. That's kind of CCAM approach. So and that time, so I said as that it only delivers the information from the infrastructures. They not get the information from the cars. So CCAM has one big merit is that they both get data from the infrastructure and from the cars. So that can also very good performance for traffic flows for the maybe it's a circumstances or good for green project. So in Japan we have to keep struggling and approaching to establish such good CCAM project. So in that time, so I would like to introduce some new organization, and there was a Mobility Innovation Japan that launched last year, and in November 2023, this year's, we're going to have some Mobility Innovation Week in Japan in this schedule. So I hope you can join this workshop and more deeper understanding about how the Japan is going to do, and we would like to express the information between the Japan and the European workshops. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your insight, and I'm sure we'll be able to put that up again later so people can take down the details of that workshop. I'd like to move the conversation a little bit more towards what is the Commission doing. Geert, this is under the auspices, we're sitting here in the Charlemagne building, people are asking themselves, we're saying nice words, give us some concrete examples.
Sure. But we've been trying to convince, I think, everybody that investments in infrastructure should always include a digital component. This is by far the cheapest part of it, if you compare it to the physical infrastructure. And it's simply a good investment. We've done many different projects, whether at research level or even implementation level, deploying using the Connecting Europe facility, proving the value of digital infrastructure and proving that the return on investment, in the latest impact assessment we did, we had a return on investment of more than €8 for every euro invested in digital infrastructure. So it is smart to invest in digital infrastructure. And we've been supporting that for at least a decade now. Specifically on what my colleague said on CITS, well, we created in 2016 the C-Roads platform, which combined, since then, multiple dozen projects all working into helping deploy deploy CITS in Europe, currently uniting 18 different member states to make sure all of this is harmonized. So we are taking this harmonized approach, standardized approach, to make sure we get the same infrastructure, the same services everywhere. Now, is the work done? Definitely not. It's again a good example of we know how to do it, we're doing it, but we should do it more. We should do it quicker. And that is, I think, one of the key questions. And again, I come back to we need to make sure everybody agrees on what we do quicker. And I noted, and I will definitely put a mental note on that the industry is asking for legislation on this. So that is very good, because if industry agrees on that type of topic, then we have a much better chance of doing actually that.
Well, I'm going to bring Pierre in now as well, because I think you pointed to it in your comments. But am I right in taking the view that better vehicle data sharing is an absolute precondition for future CCAM services? And I'm also then wondering, from a regulatory point of view, what's going to incentivize you to spend more and work more with the public sector?
I would say, perhaps as a counterpoint, that vehicles today do share a lot of data, actually. And that's even going to increase. We have an interesting piece of legislation that's now in the last miles, the Data Act, although this is not something that's going to lead to the sharing, really, of safety-relevant information, but vehicles do share a lot. And I think what we've seen today is indeed this perhaps somewhat uneven development of CITS. And again, I think what will be useful is to some degree, I think from the vehicle side, to help outline the conditions of coexistence of the two technologies that we have today. We have Wi-Fi and 5G. I do believe it is a good thing that ultimately we allow these technologies to coexist, because it is not at the dawn of this ITS era that we're in a very good position to point one out and say, this is the way. But it will be helpful to have conditions that help these two technologies coexist. But beyond that, I think it also, again, comes back to infrastructure. And I do think that we have a fair bit to learn, actually, from the Japanese experience in this regard. Japan, where today the whole 5.9 gigahertz band is perhaps a bit slow to take off, but there's a very good reason. It's because 760 megahertz ITS in Japan has actually been up and running for real for quite some time, really.
Sabine, let me bring you in to ask, what are the examples of public-private partnerships or collaborations that you've seen that really seem to show the best practice, that really get the best results? Or indeed, if there's any failures or potholes that we should look out for. How do you see that sort of cooperation working between industry, between the authorities, between NRAs and OEMs? What would you like that landscape to look like?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Actually, last year in November, CEDAR and EUCAR signed a very, very interesting and promising agreement, and we decided to further strengthen the cooperation between CEDAR and EUCAR, and we aim to identify additional items for implementation, like standardization and regulatory aspects, like was said before, and also maybe to develop guidelines for automated driving. So we have actually a lot to do. No real failure yet, but maybe I can tell you next year about possible failures we make in the process. I don't know yet. But of course, CEDAR is also involved in other platforms like CCAM or C-Roads. And actually, when thinking about the question, I think there are quite a lot of platforms already dealing with various stages and aspects of automated driving. And I think it would be useful to have a little bit more of a kind of a red thread in the, let's call it a little bit provocative, of course, jungle of different platforms. And maybe yes, it's also about for the Commission to clarify that a little bit. But as I understood, the CEF call that is now open should bring some help in the jungle of different platforms. Yeah, but anyway, of course, all the different stakeholders, as I said before, have to work together closely in order to reach the benefits of automated driving. And also, as Pierre said before, the data is there, the infrastructure is not ready. Yeah? But for the infrastructure to be ready, of course, there has to be a clarified legal framework for the use of data. There has to be trust for the use of data. And of course, NRAs especially are bound to limit their resources, and they really need a clear mandate and maybe also financial benefit to really invest in the digital road network.
Jacqueline, let me ask you to weigh in on this point that Sabine is making about trust. I mean, can you give us an examples of what tangibles are already there for road users from your perspective?
From our perspective, in fact, it's a little bit a chicken-egg issue with communication technologies and how to use them. But I think I'm a little bit wondering, there is a lot infrastructure already out there, and we are talking a lot about just the vehicle's perspective of really leveraging the benefits of this data. Just give you some examples. I mean, if it's about road safety, we have about 2,000 roadside units and many more in cities, so I'm just aware of the numbers of motorways. Testing in a pre-deployment state and having already for, I think, more than 400 roadside units and having additional in Germany soon, into operational services. So we have a little bit solved this issue of chicken-egg in a way, still maybe not enough, but that's the first step. And what we could see is the shared ecosystem works. In fact, we can warn about road safety relevant issues, and additional, we also receive data. And this data, this back channel analysis, whether it's about a connected service or whether it's about a CITS service, that leverages also the opportunities for a road operator doing traffic management. We're talking about single vehicles, we're talking maybe only about single fleets. Desiloification is really important. But by only having a few connected cars on the roads, we see some benefits for accelerating the rescue chain. If we see some slow driving vehicles on the motorways, it is sufficient, the penetration rate, for take automatic actions in our traffic management centers. We also have already some informations and maybe also a very good opportunity for the automotive industry about our variable message signs. And we all know that the ISA, or the Intelligent Speed Assistance, is obligatory in the EU. So that would be already enough to see really some very good benefits already. But I want to underline Sabine's feedback, but we need really to concentrate on existing approaches to harmonize the interfaces, to not generate too many different data mobility spaces. And when it's about CCAM, we should a little bit reflect on what is the minimum requirement we need for machines. We are all thinking and discussing a lot, in our opinion, about the human being the one receiving data, but maybe we should just also think, if we are designing digital infrastructure, I mean, we should already think about what is the machine really needing, what is the machine expecting, and then think about what we need to implement and how we need to collect data, or maybe also in the back channel, transfer it back to the infrastructure, so that we also have a business model and also some services running for us. It's a shared ecosystem and with shared responsibilities and shared benefits.
Joost, you're nodding along there, you agree.
Austrian colleague will not contradict me. A lot of good things have been said. However, what we see in practice with DFRS is one of the examples of data sharing for safety-related traffic information. And indeed, OEMs are sharing data. We'd love to have more OEMs on board, not only 5, but 15 in Europe, with road agencies, very good cooperation, and with service providers as well, and it works. It's data sharing, it's raw data being transformed to events, to real tangible events, slippery roads, road blockage. So that kind of event, which is then showcased through your broadcasting and through your, I would say, variable message sign and so on. We have other data space that really deliver. With DATEX2, with TNITS, it's about their mapping data. So a question we could have on data, why is every OEM reinventing the wheel with digitizing the physical outlets, the physical outprint, into a cloud system? Yeah? Why don't we have a common denominator with basic information on the physical environment, the ODD that you see, and upon that, we share that basic thing, and upon that you have competitive, would say OEMs then building on that with their competitive services. Because today everybody is really reinventing this thing. Yeah? And that's maybe a bit of money that we could invest in that. A CSA program would be nice for this from the Commission. Another thing and some pitfalls we see in all our projects in Ertico is interoperability. It's a buzzword, I know. It's all the legal text that you find on DMA, DSA, DGA, Data Act. It's all about interoperability. What does that mean? We need to talk the same language. Yeah? I'm talking French to a French person, he understands me. Yeah? We need to talk the same data sets. So the data set should be in open APIs, being interchangeable, so that a vehicle understands Jacqueline's roads, etc. The second thing is we should use the same spectrum, as you mentioned, the 5.9 in Europe, which is reserved for these kind of connectivity on ITS applications. We've seen the latest FCC decisions, and the waivers, which provoked also a lot of discussion. Let's see what that gives in Europe. So interoperability is key. And with NAPCOR, we are doing that. We're trying to really align the data sets for all these different platforms that we have. But secondly, that's not enough. We need the telecommunication side on our hands. We have a marriage with the energy sector on the whole decarbonization agenda, electrification, etc., and data sharing with the grid. We have a marriage also, as equally important, with the telco and IT sector. Yeah? We haven't discussed this, but this is crucial. I don't say everything needs to be 6G for tomorrow, but at least 4G and 5G do what they have to do today. When we go into a massive rollout of connectivity and connected devices, because vehicles are devices in the future, IoT devices, we probably need to upscale a bit the network, and being Europe 27 plus, I would say cross-border seamless connectivity without handover problems of cells. And that's where I count on our telecommunication friends to continue to invest with the Digital Compass, with the CEF project and the Digital Europe project and the SNS JU now, which is also very active on this. So we're happy to be partner in all these projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Geert, I think you wanted to weigh in, whether it was about open APIs or connectivity, I'm not sure, but what was it that struck you?
No, I was just, it's a combination of what Joost said and what Sabine said earlier, or rather a question you asked me. First of all, I think we've heard multiple references to the DFRS. I think that's an example of, indeed, where it works. That there is an ecosystem and data is being shared. But it is one example. And I think, Joost, you're absolutely right to point out that we need more of those examples, that we need to copy this approach for other data sets. I think it is much easier for everybody to agree that road safety is too important and we should share. And that is obvious. I'm not saying against that. But we need to share more data. Because if we want to really make progress on all fronts, not just road safety, if we want to make CCAM happen, we're going to need to build a digital infrastructure that is much wider than only road safety data. So what are we doing? Indeed, well, also already multiple colleagues have referred to the NAPCOR project. That is a key platform to work on data and interoperability and making sure that, at least from the infrastructure side, we have the same data, the same data sets available across the Union. And we're very happy to say that we have all 27 member states in there. So it was mentioned that CCAM is a team sport. Well, the team is complete. Secondly, that is the data part of things. At some point, having data on an app is very good. It's good to share data, but we're not reaching drivers. We're not reaching transport users yet. Everybody in this room, as soon as you get into a car, you don't know what an app is. So how do we get the data to to everybody out there? For that, I already mentioned also the C-Roads platform, and maybe the team is not as complete, but we have 18 member states, which is still more than enough to start the game. And then, so we have those two things. And then, of course, we have the CCAM part of things. We need to look at the future. How do we bring this quicker together? And we've created the CCAM partnership, which has over 200 members right now. And then, of course, linked to that, we're all sitting in this room here today. we have the EUCAD conference to bring people together to discuss what can we do more. So I think there is many different platforms out there. I fully take your point that we need to make sure there's not too many. I think the landscape is clearing up because it is becoming clearer to everybody what the big topics are and how we can best organize them, because you cannot tackle every single topic in every single discussion, in every single platform, every time. I do hope that the landscape is clearing up, and indeed we need to make sure we create more opportunities like this to start playing a game as a team. And a team is indeed public and private together. And I would really like to emphasize also the message you just gave on we need to understand what everybody is expecting from the other side. Because it is not a fact, it's not about saying we need more infrastructure or infrastructure is lagging. I think a statement like that needs to be qualified more. We need to say, well, what kind of infrastructure do we need? What kind of infrastructure do you really want? What kind of infrastructure would best help support vehicles? And of course, the flip side of the coin is which additional data can vehicles share to build the infrastructure together? And I think there's multiple examples of that, where the whole idea of every vehicle out there today becoming more and more equipped with advanced sensors, with advanced technology to understand what those sensors are telling the vehicle, to share that data, because that together we can build that digital infrastructure and the digital twin that we ultimately all need. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryota, let me get your perspective as you're coming from Japan. And I'm interested to pick up on what Just said about the relationship that we need to have with the telco industry, with the grid, with the energy industry. What is that like there? And are there any best practices we should take away?
Well, I think that at the moment, some private sectors join, but the major sectors are mainly from the car industries. And of course, we had the car industries should have some communicate with some government to establish how the CCAM is going. Yeah, that is the Japanese state, I think. And yeah, as you mentioned that we already have the 76 megahertz for the CITS, but it's not spread so wide in Japan actually. Because one reason why the 76 is so spread in Japan is that the frequency. Only the Japan has the 76 megahertz for ITS, but other countries does not. So that if the OEM make the devices for the CITS in Japan, but that only sells in Japan. So that that the Japanese OEMs sells the cars worldwide. So the Japanese government and the Japanese private sectors always think about how to push to the next step. So one big issue is the frequency. So we also started how to use 5.9 gigahertz for the CITS, and we plan to have some frequency band of 5.9 gigahertz for the ITS. That will make in progress in 3 or 4 years. So that will be at the moment of the Japanese state, and maybe in the future, maybe some other private sectors like energy, something like that, companies will join in here in such kind of CCAM families. But at the moment, I think we don't have such kind of activities in Japan.
Thank you. Sabine, I'd like to ask you about digitalization of the logistics sector, because we haven't talked so much about that, and I think it also goes back to some of what we're talking about, interoperability. How important is that?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. As I said before, traffic and especially the transport of goods does not stop at borders. And therefore, we are rethinking the mobility of tomorrow with a clear focus on major supply chains by strengthening cooperation between those neighboring countries and the logistics sector. Our main stake is, of course, always the before mentioned societal objectives. So it is, of course, more safety, the greening of the transport of goods, inclusion, and of course also very important for NRA's cost-effective management of public assets. Therefore, we rethink, reshape and develop solutions and recommendations for national road authorities, such as safe and sustainable infrastructure using CITS, intelligent access to existing roads, and of course, in general, the reduce of carbon emission in the transport sector.
Well, thank you. Joost, I'd like to hear from you again. I mean, whether you see any fundamental differences between, we talk about mobility in general, but we also talk about the movement of people versus the movement of goods. There's different considerations in each. If you could expand a bit on that.
That's the beauty of unexpected questions, which I will answer now unexpectedly. Moving people is indeed quite a complex thing, and especially multimodal. I'm also vice president of the Mass Alliance. I can tell you, if you have open APIs, it seems to work. If you have closed APIs with silos in each transport mode, unlevel playing field between public and private, we have a problem. I think Houston, we have a huge problem if we want to make this happen in multimodality. That's why the updated ITS directive will help us, but also the MDMS, so the new proposal on multimodal digital mobility services, a long word, for having access to each other's data and make it more transparent. Moving goods is a bit different. I'll give you one example. We have the Phoenix project that we run with European money, thanks with Article Partnership. Phoenix was about dematerialization of documents. You know how many documents a truck needs to go from one country to another within the EU? It's crazy. It's for dangerous goods. It's for not customs, but other purposes, safety purposes, road access purposes. All these documents are paper. Can you imagine? 21st century, paper. So we did the digitalization and the digitization of these documents in that project. Secondly, we measured also the CO2 outprint or footprint of these moving things. And that has resulted in an ISO standard. So thanks to us, Europe, there's an ISO standard on this measurement system. So please use it. Now, moving goods is a very logistically difficult operation. Going from the OEM of the goods, in that purpose, not the car, but the good, to the last mile delivery. Happily decarbonized to the, for example, the e-bike, the cargo bike. Can you imagine all the things of transshipment and all the individual, I would say, handovers from one transport mode to another? Yeah? Can you imagine what data and digitization and digitalization can do to make it more seamless, to make it more, I would say, operational and to win for society? That's exactly what we do with traffic management, thanks to digitalization. We do exactly the same with that business. So we're now building bridges with not only the trucks, which are the heavy-duty vehicles bringing the goods from point A to point B, and last mile delivery with decarbonized micromobility, but also having the links with the waterborne. Yeah? They're not here, maybe, I don't know, the shipping business. Yeah? They also have ITS and CITS in their jargon. We're talking to them now. Yeah? It's about when a boat will entering the harbor. The slotting of the boats in the harbor. Can you imagine? It's like airlines in the airport. We do the same with cars on the roads, yeah? And the cars among the cars or the vehicles. They have the same, I would say, more construction work. And we talk to them now to express our, I would say, experience with these. A bit like the urban air mobility, the drones in the air. So it's quite a complex area, but I think we're doing fine. And the whole SSMS, so the Smart and Sustainable Mobility Strategy of Commissioner Valian, is really hinting also at the mobility of goods. I think we're doing not so bad, actually, in Europe. Thank you.
Well, we're not far from Antwerp, so if anyone's seen what it's like up there, you know how complex it is. Yeah, I'll let you weigh in.
Yes, thank you. I'm really enjoying this ping pong, Joost. You give me great ideas. So, of course, it is very different talking between freight and people. I absolutely agree. We have different challenges, but we also have lots in common. When we started this discussion and we talked about ITS data, then a lot of that is actually very relevant for all vehicles, whether they're transporting goods or transporting people. And indeed, the story becomes more complicated if you start looking multimodal. We have indeed an upcoming initiative, and by the way, I feel the need to apologize for the very long acronyms we keep inventing. But indeed, the multimodal digital mobility services, that is focusing specifically on moving people across multiple modes. But to make an even more important point, because you pointed at their ITS and CITS, they may be called differently, but they exist in other modes as well. We have inland waterways and river information services. We have all the issues you pointed at related specifically for freight and e-documents. You have the same in ports. You have the same in railway systems. You have traffic management in all of those modes. And ultimately, what we're looking at is, can we combine all of it? Because ultimately, if you want to be really smart, if you take the smart from the smart and sustainable mobility strategy, well, you need to take all of these things into account. And how do you do that? Well, I don't have the magic bullet, but I can tell you the first step that we're taking is, apologies, another acronym coming up. We're looking in the European mobility data space. And there, what we're trying to do is indeed bring all of these different elements together. Now, all of these different elements are currently defined within their silos for good reasons. You need to make progress. You need to, at least, we talked about interoperability earlier. We talked about standardization. Well, you start doing standardizing a topic. But ultimately, you have all of these different silos. And they may all be harmonized and standardized amongst themselves. But then you still need to bring that together. That's what we're trying to do there. It is a big challenge because you're talking about established standards, established ways of working. But bringing it all together needs to be our goal. So I feel that we're expanding because we talked about digital infrastructure. I was thinking we would start focusing on digital road infrastructure. Now we're talking about digital twins that encompass the entire transport system. That is very valid. But the one common denominator I keep coming back to is that in all of these things, cooperation, collaboration are key. Everybody needs to understand that we're working on this together.
Well, I think that's a good point to open up the floor for questions. Is anyone got anything they would like to put to our panelists? I have about 10 minutes, so we could maybe take 2 or 3, but I don't see any hands going up. Anyone? Yes.
First of all, thank you for this interesting debate. Really, really interesting. I'm Mario from Belgium, from LinkedCar. We've created a Web3 platform for users, so I'm especially interested in the European data mobility space. I only have one question. All the members here are talking about we need to share more data. Now, my question is, especially if we look at connected vehicles, who do you think is the owner of the data?
A question dear to my heart. I knew it was going to come up. Okay.
That is a very good question, in fact. And I wanted to highlight a little bit this issue. In fact, we have to really think on
Yeah.
Thank you. We have to think on specific use cases. I think the owner, or we have to think about data, generating information and sharing services. And those services will be different for different, in fact, stakeholders in the whole team. And I think we really have to discuss and sit together and also share this vision of I told shared benefits, because I think if we only have a close view only on the automotive industry, we will be in a kind of one-way direction and maybe not solve the issue. So when we see to a little bit shared, to have different business models, different business cases, and then generate different data services, that will be a key issue. But we really have to start from the beginning, and also while doing that, also respecting that we have different interests. For example, if you want, or the automotive industry is really going into the 5.9 gigahertz band. You will see, of course, that the incumbent financing tools for steering road transport, like the road charging systems, will have some more requirements. And then we are talking about technology instead of sharing data, sharing responsibilities. But it needs to be a kind of working together issue.
Pierre, I'd be interested to get your view on the who owns that data.
Well, I think if you look, first of all, at from a legal point of view, again, now we're at the dawn of a new piece of legislation called the Data Act that makes it abundantly clear that data is owned by the user of the vehicle, full stop. And I would say, frankly, even as far as the industry is concerned, that's good news, because it also opens, by giving control ultimately to the owner, the driver, the user of the vehicle, you're also opening business cases, you're opening the market, and as a consumer in Europe, well, it's hard to argue against this, to give back us power at some point over European citizens, over European consumers, over their own data. But to go back perhaps to briefly to the beginning of the question, we talk about sharing more data. I don't think the answer is just about more, in the sense that, at least looking from the point of view of the vehicle, we already share a fair bit, but it's more about making sure that we all talk to each other. And we had good examples earlier of initiatives that are being taken at the national level. Yes, there are some countries that are putting effort into it, that are building infrastructure, but what we don't see, though, and I think what's missing from the conversation, is at the European level, because Shirato-san, I think, was quite clear in giving this example, 760, that is taking off in Japan, but not as much as it could, simply because of the H word, harmonization, or lack thereof in this case. So, to come to a close then on this question, simply, if we were talking about NAPCOR earlier. Well, that's a good example. I have high hopes that NAPCOR, for example, will allow us to have, at the very least, standard data formats across Europe for each nation. And then on top of that, in my ideal world, that we would have perhaps even something like a centralized data hub for Europe. And again, it's not necessarily about the volume of data, but it's about our ability to share data, really.
Any more questions that anyone would like to raise before? No, I don't see any hands. So, oh, yes, sorry. I see, just in time.
Hello, my name is Larissa Wentrold, RDW, the Netherlands. If we talk about sharing the data for connected and automated vehicles, there still is also a question about liability. So wondering what your thoughts about this are. Like who's driving, and if the car is driving and it's using data from the infrastructure, who's responsible?
Well, yes.
Good question. It's also part of the legislative process now in the Parliament and Commission and so on at PLD. But besides the legalese, we have exactly that discussion. I'll give you one example in road safety. Yeah? You get data as a vehicle manufacturer or as a road agency or as another participant, as a cyclist. Yeah? You get it from the NAPs. Yeah? You get dynamic data, RTTI, in the future from the NAPs. Real-time, more or less real-time data. Who is responsible for the quality of the data? That is it garbage in, garbage out, or is it high quality in and high quality out? Who is the master of ceremony? Who is the regulator, quote unquote, on that? There is no today. Yeah? There's nothing. Yeah? Secondly, what is the implication if you use these data for an automated vehicle? Yeah? Supposedly that the automated vehicle says, yeah, I need ISA, which is speed adaptation, which is mandatory now as a feature, and I will collect it from the NAP, from the NAPs, or from another source. Yeah? Supposedly that the OEM is indeed relying on that data to activate or deactivate the acceleration or deceleration. Thanks God, when something happens in that area, in that ODD, because the lead speed limit was not respected or has been changed in the meantime because it was not updated or refreshed on the NAPs, good luck to find out who is the responsible person. So it's quite a very complex area. Huh? And it's also what we see in DFRS. We have the same discussion with the data sharing. In TM 2.0, so traffic management, also RTTI. We got a great workshop last week on this, also the updated RTTI. So what's the liability aspect of the data ingesters? So those who put data in and actually those who put raw data in the system and those who make an event of the raw data, because it's not about raw data, it's about the event, the intelligence that you do with this. Yep. And what, and that's not, the last word has not been said on this, at least not for me.
Maybe also to add something. I mean, the legal issues is still open. But what is interesting is, I think before we have to really talk about liable data, we should start from the beginning, from the scratch, or not from the scratch. We have our existing data, but we also have to start in a parallel process to these legal discussions, also with the same triggering conditions. Because when we see two connected services over any cloud about the NAPs, I'm very curious who will take data directly from a NAP in future, whether it's about CATS and ad hoc communication. We see different trigger conditions for infrastructure, because cities are talking a little bit a different language than motorways, than different OEM brands, even even the series of the same brand is talking a different triggering condition for one event. We need also to harmonize or stabilize or specify in a way what data do we expect. And I think that's also a crucial part of the whole game. The legal issue in the end is just the end of I think, still a big work program which we solve or should solve, starting with ADAS functionalities and then go to higher levels, but do everything in parallel. We have to work with what is there, see what needs to be elaborated, and then just continue and be in the end successful.
Jacqueline, briefly, because I'm aware we're getting to the end of our time.
Okay, thank you. Just a short statement to liability and legal issues. I think so too. It's not only data sharing, but also the liability problem, where we really have to define the legal framework a bit. A bit more actually, because as I said before, national road authorities are bound to limit their capacities, and when they are liable for every accident, the National Road Authority on their road network, they are maybe frightened to invest more in CITS and in the digital infrastructure. So I think this is also yet to be a little bit clarified, nevertheless.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very briefly.
Yes. I think, liability is a complex question. Frankly, we could have another panel all day about this, but there's maybe one nuance, if I'm going to paint this in very broad strokes to bring. And again, very broad strokes, but I don't think you will find at the moment manufacturers working on automation who are planning to rely on ITS as the basic building block of automation. It's because if you have something that's not 100% consistent, then you cannot rely on it in a 100% consistent fashion. But it will be there, though, as a safety system in the same way that ADAS is today. So the idea is not to have a system that can create an accident, but rather avoids an accident in a situation where there may be one anyway.
Thank you. And Geert, final wrap-up from the DG in charge of this panel. You can have a final word.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists for the discussions. I think what we found is that we quickly broadened the scope.
Sorry, you used the other microphone. Apparently this one's not working.
Yes. Okay,
Yes.
good. First of all, thank you to all the panelists. And I think one of the things that struck me is that as we started discussing this, we very quickly branched out in many different topics, going beyond what I thought was originally we were going to discuss, showing how complex this whole domain is and how many different topics there are to tackle. I also very much appreciated the various inputs, because it shows the willingness to cooperate. I think I hope we managed to give examples of what already works today, also pointing at the many topics on which we still need to do more team sports, work together, play together, define together what we need to do. I will still reflect on whether we need more or less platforms, but definitely we need to work together. I keep saying the same thing. We will continue working also on supporting with funding, because that's another key message I retain, is that yes, we need to kickstart this process in the beginning. That is not always easy. And so I think we're now at the point where there is enough pre-deployment or early deployment out there to show what is possible. But we need to think about how to accelerate it further. Well, also on the last topic, I mean, the question was on liability, but I think the answer focused on something slightly different, which was actually much more important, is indeed we need to work on these triggering conditions, these quality requirements. I already highlighted the various platforms and instruments we've put in place to work on those, but that is what we need to do. We need to continue working on that. And I agree with what we heard earlier about. I think we wouldn't ask ourselves that question if we were talking about a human driver. It's obvious that he's liable. And I think that for an automated vehicle, for the time being, we can be happy with giving the same answer. But everything we do, when we make the quality of the data higher, when we give better services, when we inform better, whether it's a human or a machine listening, they will make better choices. They will drive safer, and the whole system will improve. So I think that is the challenge we have ahead of us.
Well, thank you very much, Geert. It's been quite a wide-ranging discussion. You mentioned funding there. Our first section after the lunch break is going to be on synergies between different funding instruments. So please be back here at 1 o'clock for that. But please, a round of applause for our panellists.